Jamal Washington, respected architect and single father to 7-year-old Zachariah, stands frozen in the airport terminal as hundreds of angry passengers surround him. The announcement about Flight 2317 being cancelled blares over the speakers. A white woman points at him screaming, "This is all your fault." Security approaches. Before we dive into how Jamal ended up in this nightmare situation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to catch more true stories of everyday injustice and triumph. Now, let's go back to the beginning of what should have been a routine business trip for Jamal and his son. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of Jamal Washington's beautifully restored brownstone in Atlanta's historic district. The warm rays illuminated the open kitchen where the 38-year-old architect stood preparing breakfast, his movements precise and methodical, just like his architectural designs. "Zachariah. Breakfast in 5 minutes, buddy." Jamal called up the stairs, flipping a perfectly golden pancake shaped like a rocket ship. It was their Friday morning tradition, special pancakes before school. But today wasn't a regular school day. Today was special. 7-year-old Zachariah thundered down the stairs, his backpack bouncing against his small frame. "Dad. I double-checked my travel bag like you said. I packed my sketch pad and pencils so I can draw the Willis Tower when we see it." Jamal smiled, setting the plate of pancakes on the table. "That's my boy. Always prepared." He ruffled his son's curly hair as Zachariah climbed onto the kitchen stool. "We'll have plenty of time to see the architecture. Chicago has some of the most beautiful buildings in the world." As Zachariah drowned his pancakes in maple syrup, Jamal checked his son's homework folder. It had become second nature to him, this dual role of mother and father. 3 years ago, cancer had taken his wife Tanya after a brutal 18-month battle. The pain had dulled over time, but moments like these, ordinary mornings when he caught himself wondering what Tanya would think of how tall Zachariah had grown or how he'd inherited her artistic eye, still hit him with unexpected force. "Dad, you're doing the sad happy face again," Zachariah observed between bites. Jamal blinked, surprised by his son's perceptiveness. "Just thinking about how proud Mom would be of you." "She'd be proud of you too," Zachariah said with a certainty that squeezed Jamal's heart. "You make the best rocket pancakes in the universe." Jamal laughed, grateful for his son's ability to pull him back to the present. "Eat up, astronaut. We've got a plane to catch." While Zachariah finished breakfast, Jamal double-checked his presentation materials for the meeting with Caldwell architecture firm. This potential partnership could transform his boutique firm into a major player in sustainable urban development. He'd been pursuing this opportunity for months, and finally landing a meeting with Bradford Caldwell himself was a career-defining moment. "Can I see the building designs again?" Zachariah asked, appearing at his elbow. Jamal pulled up the 3D renderings on his tablet. "This is the community center. See how the solar panels are integrated into the roof design?" Zachariah nodded enthusiastically. "And the rainwater collection system feeds the community garden. It's like the building is alive." "That's exactly right," Jamal said, impressed. At 7, his son already grasped fundamental concepts of sustainable architecture. Buildings should work with nature, not against it. The doorbell rang, interrupting their discussion. Jamal's mother, Evelyn, stood on the porch, elegant as always in her pressed slacks and cardigan. "There's my favorite travelers," she exclaimed, enveloping Zachariah in a hug before kissing Jamal's cheek. "All packed and ready?" "Yes, Grandma. We're going to see the tallest buildings ever." Zachariah demonstrated with his arms stretched high. While Zachariah gathered his things, Evelyn pulled Jamal aside. "You've got all the documents? Extra ID? Insurance cards?" Her voice dropped. "You know how things can be." Jamal understood his mother's concerns. As a black man traveling with his son, he'd experienced his share of random security checks and questioning glances. Mom, we'll be fine. We've got first-class tickets. The client arranged everything. Evelyn's expression remained skeptical. First-class tickets don't change people's prejudices, baby. I know, Mom. But things are different now, Jamal assured her, though they both knew better. Besides, I want Zachariah to see me confident in these spaces. I belong in first class just as much as anyone else. Evelyn squeezed his arm. You certainly do. Just, be careful. After one final check, tickets, presentation materials, luggage, snacks for Zachariah, they were ready. Jamal's Uber arrived, and with promises to call Grandma upon landing, father and son set off for Atlanta International Airport. During the ride, Jamal reviewed his presentation notes while Zachariah chattered excitedly about seeing snow in Chicago. November in the Windy City meant possible flurries, a thrilling prospect for a boy raised in Georgia. Dad, will the plane go above the clouds? Can we touch them? We'll definitely be above the clouds, but they're just water vapor, like fog. You can't actually touch them, Jamal explained. Like how some things look solid but aren't really? Zachariah asked, his young mind making connections. Exactly, Jamal smiled, once again impressed by his son's thinking. Appearances can be deceiving. He didn't realize how prophetic those words would prove to be in the hours ahead. Atlanta International Airport bustled with Friday morning travelers when Jamal and Zachariah arrived. The departures level echoed with announcements, rolling suitcases, and the constant hum of conversation. Zachariah pressed his face against the massive windows, eyes wide as a jumbo jet taxied on the distant runway. Dad! Look at that one. It's gigantic. He exclaimed, pointing excitedly. Jamal checked the departures board. Our flight leaves in 2 hours. Plenty of time to get through security. He guided Zachariah toward the first-class check-in counters, where the lines were significantly shorter. As they approached the designated area, a white couple in business attire cut directly in front of them, not even acknowledging their presence. Excuse me, Jamal said politely. We were next in line. The man glanced back dismissively. This is the first-class check-in. Yes, I'm aware, Jamal replied evenly. We're flying first class too. The woman's eyebrows raised slightly before she muttered an unconvincing, sorry, and stepped aside, exchanging a look with her husband that Jamal had seen countless times before, surprise tinged with suspicion. Zachariah tugged at his father's sleeve. Why did they think we weren't flying first class, Dad? Jamal sighed internally. Some people make assumptions, buddy. It doesn't reflect on us. When they reached the counter, the ticket agent, whose name tag read, Bethany, greeted them with a professional smile that faltered momentarily when Jamal presented their first-class tickets. Oh. First class to Chicago. Her tone carried unmistakable surprise. May I see your ID, sir? Jamal handed over his driver's license, which Bethany scrutinized with unusual thoroughness, glancing between his face and the photo multiple times. She then turned to her computer, typing more extensively than she had for previous passengers. Is there a problem? Jamal asked calmly. No, no problem, Bethany replied quickly. Just, confirming some details. She examined their tickets again. And you're traveling with your son? Do you have documentation proving your relationship? Jamal felt the familiar weight of unwarranted suspicion settling on his shoulders. The white family that had checked in before them, also with children, hadn't been asked for proof of their relationship. He's my son. Is there some reason you need additional documentation? Jamal kept his voice steady, conscious of Zachariah listening intently beside him. Bethany backpedaled. It's just routine for unaccompanied minors or single-parent travel sometimes. Sometimes, Jamal repeated. I see. He produced Zachariah's passport, which clearly listed Jamal as his father. After another uncomfortable minute of verification, Bethany finally issued their boarding passes and checked their luggage, explaining the first-class lounge location with renewed professionalism. As they walked toward security, Zachariah asked quietly, "Why did she look at your ID so long, Dad?" Jamal chose his words carefully. "Sometimes people are extra thorough at their jobs. It's nothing to worry about." The security checkpoint brought another round of random selection. Despite the relatively empty TSA pre-check lane that their first-class tickets qualified them for, a TSA agent directed Jamal to the full-body scanner while waving through several white passengers with a simple metal detector wand. "Sir, please step aside for additional screening," the agent instructed after Jamal had already been through the scanner. "Is there a problem with the scan?" Jamal asked. "Just routine additional screening, sir." Zachariah watched wide-eyed as agents patted down his father and swabbed his carry-on bag for explosive residue. None of the other passengers received this level of scrutiny. "Why do they keep stopping us, Dad?" Zachariah whispered once they were finally cleared. Before Jamal could formulate an age-appropriate response, a man standing nearby overheard and introduced himself. "Dr. Keith Reynolds," he said, extending his hand to Jamal. "And unfortunately, young man, what you're experiencing is called traveling while black." The distinguished-looking black man in his 50s offered a knowing smile. "Flying to Chicago as well?" "Yes," Jamal replied, grateful for the understanding. "Business meeting. I'm Jamal Washington, and this is my son Zachariah. Pleasure to meet you both. I'm giving a lecture at Northwestern. Perhaps we're on the same flight. AC 2317. Jamal nodded. "That's us. First class." "Same here, Dr. Reynolds said. "Though based on experience, I suggest we allow extra time for the inevitable verification at the gate." His tone was light but his eyes communicated shared understanding of an exhausting reality. As they approached the first-class lounge, the attendant at the entrance stopped them immediately. "Excuse me, sir. This is the first-class lounge." Her emphasis on first class made her meaning clear. Jamal silently presented their boarding passes. "Oh," she said, scanning them with visible surprise. "Very well, then." Inside the lounge, Zachariah whispered, "Dad, why does everyone keep acting like we don't belong here?" Dr. Reynolds, who had followed them in, exchanged a glance with Jamal before addressing Zachariah. "Young man, some people have preconceived notions about who should be in certain spaces. But remember, you belong anywhere your ticket says you do." Jamal appreciated the solidarity but worried about the cumulative effect of these interactions on his son. What should have been an exciting travel experience was becoming a series of lessons in racial profiling. As they settled into the comfortable lounge chairs, Jamal checked his watch. An hour until boarding, and they'd already navigated multiple unnecessary obstacles. He could only hope the actual flight would be smoother. When boarding time approached, Jamal and Zachariah said goodbye to Dr. Reynolds, who was on a later flight to Chicago, and made their way to gate A12. The priority boarding lane for first-class passengers stood nearly empty, separated by a velvet rope from the growing line of economy travelers. "First-class passengers and those needing special assistance may begin boarding now," announced the gate agent, a young man whose name tag identified him as Tyler Phillips. Jamal guided Zachariah toward the priority lane, boarding passes in hand. They'd taken only 2 steps when a flight attendant intercepted them. "Excuse me, sir. This lane is for first-class passengers only," said the woman, whose name badge read, Denise Mason. "Yes, we're flying first class," Jamal replied, extending their boarding passes for inspection. Denise examined the documents with obvious skepticism. "May I see your ID as well?" Jamal produced his driver's license, maintaining his composure despite the fact that no other first-class passengers had been asked for additional identification. A businessman in an expensive suit standing nearby, later identified as Harold Fletcher, made an audible huffing sound. "Some people will try anything to board early," he muttered to his companion, just loud enough for Jamal to hear. Denise compared Jamal's ID to his boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny. "And the child is traveling with you?" "Yes, he's my son," Jamal answered, his patience wearing thin. "Do you have documentation proving that?" Zachariah shifted uncomfortably beside his father, eyes downcast with embarrassment. "I presented all required documentation at check-in," Jamal stated firmly. "Is there a specific reason you're questioning our travel arrangements?" Denise hesitated, then reluctantly returned his ID. "Just doing my job, sir." As they proceeded toward the jet bridge, Denise called after them, "Sir, I need to verify your boarding passes again." Jamal stopped, took a deep breath, and turned back. "You just checked them." "I need to confirm the seat assignments," she insisted. By this point, other first-class passengers were watching the interaction with mixed expressions of confusion and discomfort. Harold Fletcher rolled his eyes dramatically. "Some people should just follow the rules instead of making scenes," he commented loudly to no one in particular. This third verification was finally interrupted by gate agent Tyler Phillips, who stepped forward. "Is there a problem here, Denise?" "Just confirming these passengers' documentation," she replied stiffly. Tyler glanced at the boarding passes still in Denise's hand, then at Jamal and Zachariah. "Their boarding passes are valid first-class tickets. They're good to board." His tone carried a hint of reprimand toward his colleague. Denise reluctantly stepped aside, and Jamal nodded gratefully to Tyler before guiding Zachariah onto the jet bridge. "Dad," Zachariah whispered, his small hand clutching Jamal's tightly, "why does she keep checking our tickets?" "Sometimes people have trouble believing we belong in certain places," Jamal explained quietly. "But that's their problem, not ours. Remember what Dr. Reynolds said, we belong anywhere our tickets say we do." Zachariah nodded, but his earlier excitement had dimmed considerably. At the aircraft door, flight attendant Amber Stewart greeted passengers with a practiced smile that vanished when she saw Jamal and Zachariah. "Good morning," Jamal said pleasantly, handing over their boarding passes. Amber examined them with the same suspicious scrutiny they'd already endured multiple times. "These are first-class seats," she stated, as if they might not be aware. "Yes, we know," Jamal confirmed patiently. After another uncomfortable pause, she gestured them forward. "First 3 rows on the left." As they settled into their spacious first-class seats, 2A and 2B, Zachariah's eyes widened at the amenities. "Dad, look! The seats are like chairs, and there's so much room." Jamal smiled, relieved to see his son's enthusiasm returning. "First class has its perks, buddy." A middle-aged white woman took the seat across the aisle, 2C. She introduced herself as Patricia Coleman, a literature professor returning home to Chicago. She smiled warmly at Zachariah. "First time flying first class, young man?" "Yes, ma'am." Zachariah replied excitedly. "Dad has an important meeting, so we get to sit in the big seats." Patricia chuckled. "Well, you're in for a treat. The hot cookies they serve are amazing." Their pleasant conversation was interrupted when Amber Stewart reappeared, standing over them with a frown. "May I see your boarding passes again?" she demanded. Jamal inhaled deeply, maintaining his composure. "You just checked them at the door." "I need to verify again," she insisted. Patricia Coleman watched with growing concern as Jamal silently handed over the documents. Around them, other first-class passengers were being served pre-departure beverages, but Amber had bypassed Jamal and Zachariah for this verification process. "Is there a problem?" Patricia asked Amber directly. "Just routine verification," Amber replied curtly, still examining the boarding passes even though they were clearly legitimate. Harold Fletcher, the businessman from the gate, took his seat in 1A, directly in front of Jamal. Turning around, he remarked loudly, "Some people should know their place instead of causing delays for everyone else." Zachariah shrunk in his seat, his eyes filling with tears of embarrassment and confusion. Jamal placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder while addressing Amber. Our boarding passes have been verified multiple times already. Unless you're checking everyone's documentation repeatedly, I'd appreciate being treated like the other first-class passengers. Amber's expression hardened. Sir, I'm just following protocol. For some passengers more than others, it seems, Patricia observed pointedly. Amber returned the boarding passes and walked away without offering the refreshments she'd provided to other passengers. I'm sorry you're experiencing this, Patricia said quietly to Jamal. It's completely unacceptable. Jamal nodded appreciatively but focused on Zachariah, who was fighting back tears. Hey, buddy, he whispered, don't let them dim your light. We're going to have an amazing time in Chicago, okay? Zachariah nodded bravely, but his earlier excitement had been thoroughly dampened. Why do they keep checking us, Dad? Did we do something wrong? The innocent question broke Jamal's heart. No, Zachariah. We didn't do anything wrong. Some people just have unfair ideas in their heads, and that's not our burden to carry. As the remaining passengers boarded, Jamal couldn't help but notice that not a single other first-class passenger had their documentation checked after boarding. He maintained his professional demeanor, but inside, a familiar anger simmered, not just for himself, but for the lessons his young son was being forced to learn far too early. The boarding process was nearly complete when Amber Stewart returned to their row, this time with an even more rigid demeanor. Standing over Jamal and Zachariah, she held out her hand expectantly. Sir, I need to see additional identification verification, she announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Jamal looked up from the architecture magazine he'd been showing Zachariah. Excuse me. Additional ID verification, Amber repeated impatiently. It's protocol. Protocol for whom? Jamal asked calmly, though his patience was wearing dangerously thin. I haven't seen you request additional ID from any other passengers after boarding. Harold Fletcher turned around from his seat in front. Some people should really understand when they're in places they don't typically belong, he remarked loudly to no one in particular. It creates unnecessary complications for everyone else. Zachariah's small body tensed beside his father. His eyes, which had lit up at the magazine's pictures of Chicago's magnificent architecture, now filled with confusion and hurt. Dad, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Why does that man keep saying mean things? Before Jamal could respond, Patricia Coleman intervened from across the aisle. Excuse me, sir, she addressed Fletcher directly. Your comments are inappropriate and unwelcome. These gentlemen have every right to be here. Fletcher scoffed. I'm simply stating that when people are in unfamiliar territory, they should expect additional scrutiny. I assure you, Jamal said, his voice measured but firm, first class is not unfamiliar territory to me. Now, he turned back to Amber, I've shown my identification multiple times already. What specific, additional verification are you requesting that you haven't required from other passengers? Amber's face flushed. Sir, if you continue to be difficult. Patricia interrupted incredulously. He's asking a reasonable question about being singled out for treatment that no other passenger has received. Zachariah began to cry quietly, the tension overwhelming his young composure. Dad, I want to go home, he whispered. I don't want to go to Chicago anymore. The sight of his son's tears cracked something in Jamal's carefully maintained professional veneer. He gently wiped Zachariah's cheek before looking directly at Amber. My son and I have valid first-class tickets. We've verified our identity multiple times. Either treat us with the same respect you've shown other passengers, or please explain, specifically, why we're being subjected to this repeated scrutiny. What do you think about this situation? Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this while traveling? Comment number 1 if you believe Amber's actions were racially motivated, or number 2 if you think she was just doing her job. Don't forget to hit that like button if you appreciate Jamal's composure in protecting his son while standing up for himself. As this tense confrontation continues to unfold, what would you do in Jamal's position? Would you comply with yet another ID check to avoid further conflict, or stand your ground against the discriminatory treatment? Let's see how Jamal handles this escalating situation. Amber's expression hardened. "Sir, if you refuse to comply with crew member instructions." "I haven't refused anything," Jamal corrected her calmly. "I'm asking why I'm being singled out for instructions that haven't been given to other passengers." By now, several nearby passengers had begun recording the interaction on their phones. The discriminatory treatment was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone in the first-class cabin. Amber turned away, speaking into her crew phone. Minutes later, a man in a senior flight attendant uniform approached. His name tag read, Gregory Walsh. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Amber rather than Jamal. "This passenger is being uncooperative with standard verification procedures," Amber reported, conveniently omitting that she'd already checked their documentation multiple times. "I've complied with every legitimate request," Jamal clarified, "but my son and I are being subjected to repeated document checks that no other passenger has experienced." Gregory barely glanced at Jamal. "Sir, our flight attendants are authorized to verify passenger documentation as needed for security purposes." "Selectively?" Patricia interjected. "Because I've been observing carefully, and these gentlemen are the only passengers who've been checked repeatedly." "That's not security, that's profiling." Zachariah's tears had given way to confusion and embarrassment. "Dad, why are they only checking us? Is it because—" He hesitated, then whispered the question that broke Jamal's heart, "Is it because we're black?" The cabin fell momentarily silent. Several passengers looked away uncomfortably, while others watched with increasing concern. Jamal made a decision. He pulled out his phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this interaction," he informed Gregory and Amber calmly. "My son and I have been singled out for repeated document verification that no other passenger has been subjected to. I've complied multiple times, but I'm now formally asking, what specific security concern are you addressing by checking our documentation again when you haven't done so with any other passengers?" Gregory's demeanor immediately changed. "Sir, recording is not permitted, actually," Patricia interrupted, holding up her phone. "FAA regulations don't prohibit recording if it doesn't interfere with crew duties. And several of us are now documenting what appears to be clear discriminatory treatment." Jamal spoke clearly for the recording. "For the record, my son and I have been asked to present our boarding passes and ID 4 times now. We've complied each time. No other passengers have been asked even once after boarding. I'm simply asking for equal treatment." Gregory's face flushed with anger. "Sir, you're being disruptive. If you continue, I'll have to ask you to deplane." "Disruptive?" Another passenger 2 rows back stood up. He's sitting calmly in his assigned seat asking why he's being harassed. "How is that disruptive?" Harold Fletcher turned around again. "This is why these people shouldn't, these people," several passengers repeated simultaneously, the racial undertone unmistakable. The situation was spiraling. Zachariah pressed against his father's side, trembling slightly. Seeing his son's distress, Jamal made another decision. He dialed a number and put the call on speaker. "Derek Thompson speaking," answered a deep voice. "Derek, it's Jamal Washington. I'm on flight 2317 to Chicago with Zachariah. We're being subjected to repeated document verification that no other passengers are experiencing. The senior flight attendant is now threatening to remove us for asking why we're being singled out. I'm recording this interaction." Derek's tone immediately shifted to professional. "I understand. As your attorney, I advise you to maintain your recording. Under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and DOT regulations, discriminatory treatment based on race in air transportation is prohibited. Ask for the names of all crew members involved and whether this is official airline policy to repeatedly verify documentation for some passengers but not others. Gregory's expression changed at the mention of an attorney and specific regulations. Amber took a half-step back. "Sir," Gregory began, his tone suddenly less confrontational, "there's no need to involve attorneys. We're simply following discriminatory practices." Jamal supplied. "Because that's what this appears to be, and my son is being traumatized by this treatment." The commotion had drawn attention from the front of the aircraft. A man in a pilot's uniform appeared in the cabin, Captain Brandon Miller, according to his name badge. "What's the situation here?" he asked Gregory. "These passengers are being disruptive and threatening legal action," Gregory reported. "That's a mischaracterization," Jamal corrected. "We're being subjected to repeated discriminatory document checks and simply asking to be treated like other passengers." Captain Miller barely glanced at Jamal or the recording phones. "Sir, as captain, I have authority over this aircraft. If my crew reports disruptive behavior, I can have passengers removed." "On what grounds?" Jamal asked calmly. "For asking why we're being profiled." Zachariah, who had been silent and frightened throughout this exchange, suddenly looked up at the captain. His small voice carried clearly in the tense cabin, "Dad, is it because we're black?" The innocent question hung in the air. Several passengers gasped quietly. Patricia Coleman wiped away a tear. Jamal placed his arm protectively around his son's shoulders and addressed the captain with quiet dignity that commanded the attention of everyone in the cabin. "My son asked a question that deserves an answer. We have valid tickets. We've complied with every reasonable request. Yet we alone have been subjected to repeated document verification and now threats of removal. If this isn't about race, then what is it about?" Captain Miller's jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't appreciate the insinuation. This is about compliance with crew instructions." "Discriminatory instructions," Patricia corrected. "And many of us are witnessing and documenting it." The captain surveyed the cabin, noting the multiple recording phones and disapproving faces of other first-class passengers. His expression hardened. "Sir, you have a choice. Either you and your son deplane voluntarily, or I'll cancel this flight for all passengers due to a security concern." The threat hung in the air as passengers exchanged shocked glances. Jamal Washington faced a devastating choice: surrender to discrimination and humiliation in front of his son, or stand his ground and potentially ruin travel plans for everyone on board. A ripple of disbelief spread through the cabin at Captain Miller's ultimatum. Several passengers began protesting immediately. "That's outrageous. They haven't done anything wrong. You can't punish everyone because of your discrimination." Jamal remained composed, though inside he was calculating his options. Beside him, Zachariah sat perfectly still, his small shoulders rigid with tension. The 7-year-old was trying so hard to be brave, but his trembling lip betrayed him. "So to be clear, Captain," Jamal said, his voice steady despite the pressure, "you're threatening to cancel an entire flight because we asked why we're being subjected to repeated document checks that no other passengers have experienced." Captain Miller crossed his arms. "I'm responding to a disruptive situation that's interfering with crew duties." Patricia Coleman stood from her seat. "Captain, I'm a witness that these gentlemen have been nothing but polite while being subjected to discriminatory treatment. Canceling this flight would be a transparent attempt to deflect from your crew's behavior." Harold Fletcher swiveled in his seat again. "If they'd just complied without making a scene," "They did comply," interrupted another passenger. "Multiple times. That's the whole point." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Jamal made a crucial decision. Looking directly at Captain Miller while still recording, he stated, "I will not voluntarily leave this flight. My son and I have valid tickets, we've broken no rules, and we have every right to be here. If you choose to cancel this flight, that will be your decision alone, and the other passengers will know exactly why it happened." Captain Miller's face flushed red. That's your final answer? Yes, Jamal replied firmly. And I should inform you that I'm still on the phone with my attorney, who is documenting this entire exchange. The captain turned to the flight attendants. Prepare to deplane. Flight 2317 is cancelled due to security concerns. A chorus of protests erupted from the passengers. Several people stood, voicing their outrage. Amber Stewart looked uncomfortable for the first time, while Gregory Walsh avoided eye contact with everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Miller announced loudly over the protests, due to an unruly passenger situation, we are cancelling this flight. Please gather your belongings and proceed to the gate for rebooking. This is absolutely unacceptable. Patricia exclaimed. You're cancelling a flight because you don't want to admit to racial profiling. As the announcement was made, Jamal quietly returned to his call with Derek. They're cancelling the entire flight, he informed his attorney friend. Stay put and keep recording, Derek advised. This is textbook retaliation. Does the airline know who you are, Jamal? I don't think so, Jamal replied. My firm designed 3 of their lounges, but that was through Caldwell's connections. A new idea formed in Jamal's mind. Still on speaker phone with Derek, he made another call, this one to Wesley Bennett, the airline CEO, whom he'd met several times during the lounge design process. As the phone rang, Captain Miller returned to the cockpit while Amber and Gregory began instructing passengers to gather their belongings. The mood in the cabin had shifted from shock to anger, with most passengers clearly understanding the discriminatory nature of what they were witnessing. Wesley Bennett answered a confident voice. Mr. Bennett, this is Jamal Washington from Washington Architectural Design. We met during the Sky Lounge renovations last year. Jamal. Of course. What can I do for you? Bennett sounded genuinely pleased to hear from him. I'm currently sitting on your flight 2317 to Chicago with my 7-year-old son, Jamal explained calmly. The captain just cancelled the entire flight because I questioned why my son and I were repeatedly asked to verify our first-class tickets when no other passengers received the same treatment. There was a moment of silence before Bennett responded. You're saying the flight was cancelled because you were profiled? Yes, sir. I have video documentation, multiple witnesses, and my attorney on another line. Captain Brandon Miller gave me an ultimatum, either we deplane voluntarily despite having done nothing wrong, or he would cancel the flight for everyone. Meanwhile, passengers were reluctantly gathering their belongings, many casting sympathetic glances toward Jamal and Zachariah. Others openly recorded the situation on their phones, and the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was already trending as initial posts about the incident spread across social media. Mr. Washington, could you put me on speaker, please? Bennett requested. Jamal complied. Bennett's authoritative voice carried clearly through the cabin. This is Wesley Bennett, CEO of this airline. May I speak with the senior flight attendant present? The cabin fell silent. Gregory Walsh approached cautiously, his earlier confidence evaporated. This is Senior Flight Attendant Walsh. Mr. Walsh, is it true that Flight 2317 has been cancelled because Mr. Washington questioned why he and his son were being subjected to repeated document verification? Gregory stammered, Sir, there was a disruptive situation. That's not what I asked, Bennett interrupted sharply. Were Mr. Washington and his child subjected to multiple document checks that other passengers did not experience? The silence was damning. Finally, Gregory admitted, they were checked more than once, yes. And when Mr. Washington questioned this treatment, the captain threatened to cancel the flight. The captain made that determination based on what, exactly? Bennett's voice had turned icy. Mr. Walsh, I'm looking at social media right now, where multiple passengers are sharing videos of what appears to be textbook discrimination. I'm also being informed that our PR team is receiving press inquiries about this incident already. Passengers exchanged glances, many nodding in confirmation that they'd shared what they witnessed. Hold all actions regarding this flight, Bennett commanded. I'm sending our regional manager Diane Hoffman to the gate immediately. No one is to deplane until she arrives. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically. Amber Stewart had gone pale, while Gregory fidgeted uncomfortably. Captain Miller remained conspicuously absent from the cabin. Zachariah leaned against his father. "Are we still going to Chicago, Dad?" he whispered. "Yes, buddy," Jamal assured him, gently squeezing his shoulder. "I think we are." Within minutes, a professionally dressed woman hurried onto the plane. "I'm Diane Hoffman, regional manager," she announced, making her way directly to Jamal and Zachariah's row. "Mr. Washington. I've been briefed by Mr. Bennett. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience today." Harold Fletcher snorted derisively. "So they get special treatment now?" Diane turned to him sharply. "Sir, equal treatment is not special treatment. And I'd advise you to reconsider your comments, as they've been recorded and could be construed as contributing to a hostile environment." Fletcher fell silent, finally chastened. Turning back to Jamal, Diane continued, "Mr. Washington, would you and your son please come with me to discuss this situation privately? I assure you that your seats will be protected, and will address this appropriately." Jamal hesitated, looking at his son. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Hoffman, but any discussion should include the passengers who witnessed this treatment. They've been inconvenienced by the captain's retaliatory decision, and they deserve transparency." Patricia Coleman nodded approvingly. "Many of us have documented what happened. We stand as witnesses." Diane assessed the situation, noting the united front among most passengers. "Very well. Captain Miller, Flight Attendant Stewart, and Senior Attendant Walsh will be removed from this flight immediately. We'll bring in a new crew, and we deeply apologize for the delay this will cause." "And what about the discriminatory treatment my son and I experienced?" Jamal pressed. "This isn't just about a delay. Mr. Bennett has authorized me to inform you that those crew members will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," Diane assured him. "We take discrimination extremely seriously." As if on cue, Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of controlled anger. He was quickly escorted off the aircraft by Diane's colleagues, followed by Amber Stewart and Gregory Walsh. The remaining passengers broke into spontaneous applause. While they waited for the new crew, Patricia organized a group of witnesses to provide formal statements about what they'd observed. Derek Thompson, still on the phone, offered legal guidance to anyone who wished to document the discrimination they'd witnessed. Harold Fletcher attempted to deplane quietly, muttering about the whole situation being blown out of proportion, but found his path blocked by other passengers. "You were part of the problem, sir," one woman told him firmly. "The least you can do is stay and face the consequences of your behavior." Throughout it all, Jamal focused on Zachariah, who was processing the whirlwind of events with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. "Dad," he whispered, "did we just change things?" Jamal smiled at his son's perceptiveness. "I think we did, buddy. Sometimes standing up for what's right is hard, but it's always important." Zachariah nodded thoughtfully. "Like in your buildings, if the foundation isn't right, nothing else can be right either." Once again, Jamal was struck by his son's wisdom. Exactly like that. Integrity is the foundation of everything worthwhile. As they waited for the new crew to arrive, Diane Hoffman returned to their row. "Mr. Washington, Mr. Bennett would like to speak with you again." Jamal took the offered phone, listening intently to the CEO's words. When he hung up, he turned to Zachariah with the first genuine smile since they'd boarded the plane. "Looks like our trip to Chicago just got a lot more interesting, buddy." The atmosphere on Flight 2317 had transformed dramatically. Where tension and discrimination had prevailed minutes earlier, a sense of collective justice now filled the cabin. Passengers who had been strangers were now united witnesses to a stand against injustice, with most expressing their support to Jamal and Zachariah. Diane Hoffman efficiently coordinated the crew change, keeping passengers updated throughout the process. "The new flight crew will be here within 20 minutes, she announced. "We appreciate your patience and understanding." Meanwhile, Jamal's phone conversation with CEO Wesley Bennett had been more than just an apology. "What did Mr. Bennett say, Dad?" Zachariah asked, his natural curiosity reasserting itself now that the immediate threat had passed. Jamal smiled. "He's making sure this situation is handled properly. And he's arranged something special for us in Chicago." As Diane worked to smooth the transition, social media was erupting with accounts of what had transpired. Passengers had uploaded videos showing the discriminatory treatment, Captain Miller's retaliatory cancellation threat, and the subsequent intervention by the CEO. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack had gone viral, with thousands sharing similar experiences of discrimination in air travel. Patricia Coleman, who had emerged as an unexpected ally, showed Jamal some of the trending posts on her tablet. "Your stand is resonating with people across the country," she said. "Sometimes it takes one brave person to catalyze change." Jamal nodded appreciatively but remained focused on Zachariah's well-being. "How are you doing, buddy?" That was a lot to handle. Zachariah considered the question thoughtfully. "I was scared when everyone was being mean. But then people started standing up for us, and it felt important." He looked up at his father. "Is this what you meant about dignity, Dad?" "Exactly that," Jamal affirmed, his chest swelling with pride at his son's understanding. "Dignity means knowing your worth doesn't change based on how others treat you." Their conversation was interrupted when Harold Fletcher approached their row, his earlier arrogance noticeably diminished. Several passengers watched warily as he cleared his throat. "I wanted to say that I may have misjudged the situation," he offered awkwardly. "My comments were inappropriate." It wasn't quite an apology, but before Jamal could respond, Patricia intervened. "Sir, if you're attempting to make amends because you're worried about appearing in those viral videos, save it. True remorse would acknowledge the harm of your racist assumptions." Fletcher's face reddened. "I never said anything about race." "You didn't have to," another passenger chimed in. "Your comments about these people and knowing their place made your meaning clear." Fletcher retreated to his seat without further comment, but the confrontation highlighted something important. The situation had forced a reckoning not just for the airline crew but for passengers who enabled or ignored such discrimination. Diane Hoffman returned to update them. "The new crew has arrived and is being briefed. We should begin boarding again shortly." She lowered her voice. "Mr. Washington, our PR team informs me that this incident is gaining significant attention. Reporters are gathering at both departure and arrival airports." Jamal considered this development. "I didn't set out to create a media storm, Ms. Hoffman. I simply wanted my son and I to be treated with the same respect as other passengers." "I understand," Diane nodded. "Mr. Bennett has authorized me to offer private car service in Chicago and accommodation upgrades if you prefer to avoid the press." "I appreciate that," Jamal replied. "Let me discuss it with my son." As Diane moved to address other passengers' concerns, Jamal received another call, this time from Derek Thompson. "Jamal, I'm at the airport," Derek informed him. "The airline's legal team has reached out already. They're proposing immediate compensation and settlement discussions." "That was fast," Jamal observed. "They know exactly how bad this looks," Derek replied. "Especially with the social media traction. But more importantly, how's Zachariah holding up?" "He's processing it all remarkably well," Jamal said, glancing at his son who was now showing Patricia his architecture sketchbook. "I think the positive resolution is helping." "Good. I've prepared some preliminary paperwork. The airline seems eager to make this right," but we should ensure any agreement addresses the systemic issues, not just your individual experience. Jamal agreed. This isn't about compensation for me, Derek. It's about ensuring other families don't face the same treatment. After ending the call, Jamal noticed that the boarding process had resumed with the new crew at the gate. The replacement captain, Lawrence Wilson, was personally greeting first-class passengers as they reboarded, a stark contrast to Captain Miller's approach. When Captain Wilson reached Jamal and Zachariah, he extended his hand respectfully. "Mr. Washington, I'm Captain Lawrence Wilson. I want to personally assure you that you and your son will receive nothing but professional courtesy on this flight." "Thank you, Captain," Jamal replied, shaking his hand. "We appreciate that." The lead flight attendant, Jasmine Hughes, also made a point of welcoming them warmly. "If you need anything at all during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask," she said, smiling genuinely at Zachariah. "And I hear someone's excited to see the Willis Tower?" Zachariah's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes. I'm going to draw it in my sketchbook." "Well, we have a special architecture magazine in our first-class collection that features Chicago landmarks. Would you like to see it?" As Jasmine engaged Zachariah with genuine warmth, Jamal observed the transformation in the cabin's atmosphere. The new crew members were consummate professionals, treating all passengers with equal respect while subtly ensuring that Jamal and Zachariah received proper attention. Harold Fletcher, meanwhile, received an unexpected surprise when he returned to his seat. A flight attendant approached him discreetly. "Sir, due to a reallocation of cabin resources, we need to reseat you in economy class," she informed him quietly. "Your fare difference will be refunded, of course." Fletcher began to protest but stopped when he noticed several passengers watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Gathering his belongings, he made his way to the back of the plane, a fitting consequence for his earlier behavior. As the boarding process completed, Diane Hoffman made one final visit to Jamal's row. "Mr. Washington, Mr. Bennett would like to speak with you again before takeoff." Jamal took the offered phone. "Mr. Bennett?" "Jamal, I wanted to update you personally," the CEO began. "We're implementing immediate changes to our training protocols based on today's incident. I've also arranged for our Chief Diversity Officer to meet your flight in Chicago." "I appreciate that," Jamal replied. "Though I hope you understand this isn't about special treatment, it's about equal treatment." "Absolutely," Bennett agreed. "Which is why we're using this as a catalyst for company-wide policy revisions. Your architectural expertise has helped shape our physical spaces, perhaps your experience today can help reshape our company culture." After the call ended, Jamal reflected on the unexpected turn of events. What began as a simple business trip had transformed into something much more significant, a moment of standing firm against discrimination that might actually create lasting change. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Patricia leaned across the aisle. "Your son is watching you very carefully, you know. The way you handled this situation with such dignity, that's a lesson he'll carry forever." Jamal glanced at Zachariah, who was now happily examining the architecture magazine Jasmine had brought him. Despite the morning's challenges, his son's resilience shone through. "Sometimes our children learn the most from the situations we wish they didn't have to experience," Jamal observed quietly. Patricia nodded. "But they also learn how to face those situations with courage. That's no small gift." As Flight 2317 finally taxied toward the runway, nearly 2 hours behind schedule, Jamal received a text message from Derek, "Legal paperwork in process. Airline very cooperative. Media waiting in Chicago. How do you want to handle?" Jamal considered the question as the engines revved for takeoff. This incident could remain a private victory, or it could become part of a larger conversation about discrimination in travel. The choice was his to make. He looked at Zachariah, now pointing excitedly as the plane lifted into the sky, and made his decision. The atmosphere on Flight 2317 had transformed completely. With the new crew led by Captain Wilson and Jasmine Hughes, the professional, respectful service highlighted just how inappropriate the previous crew's behavior had been. For the first time since arriving at the airport, Jamal felt he could relax slightly, though he remained keenly aware of the impact the morning's events had on Zachariah. "Dad, look how small everything gets," Zachariah exclaimed, pressing his face against the window as Atlanta shrank beneath them. The wonder in his voice was a welcome return to the excitement he'd felt before the discrimination began. Across the aisle, Patricia Coleman smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "First time flying?" she asked kindly. "No, ma'am. But it's my first time in first class," Zachariah replied. "And my first time going to Chicago to see the super tall buildings." "Well, you're in for a treat," Patricia told him. "Chicago has some of the most beautiful architecture in the country." While Zachariah chatted with Patricia about buildings, Jamal's phone vibrated with an incoming video call from Wesley Bennett. He accepted, and the airline CEO's concerned face appeared on screen. "Jamal, I've been reviewing the footage from the cabin cameras," Bennett began without preamble. "I want to personally apologize again for the treatment you and your son experienced. It's completely unacceptable." "I appreciate that, Mr. Bennett," Jamal replied. "Please, call me Wesley," the CEO insisted. "I've also spoken with several passengers who witnessed the incident. Their accounts are consistent with what the footage shows, clear discriminatory treatment." Jasmine Hughes approached with refreshments, pausing respectfully when she noticed Jamal was on a call. He gestured that it was okay to proceed, and she quietly served their drinks. "The difference in service is notable," Jamal observed to Bennett after Jasmine moved on. "That's how it should have been from the start," Bennett affirmed. "I've authorized Diane to implement immediate disciplinary actions. Captain Miller, Mr. Walsh, and Ms. Stewart have been suspended pending a formal investigation." Nearby passengers had begun to notice the video call, and several nudged each other in recognition of the airline's CEO on Jamal's screen. The conversation had become a subtle public statement about the company's response to discrimination. "What matters most to me," Jamal said, "is ensuring this doesn't happen to other families. My son had to witness discrimination firsthand today, and that's a lesson no child should learn through personal experience." Bennett nodded soberly. "I couldn't agree more. That's why I've called an emergency meeting with our executive team. We're instituting mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, effective immediately. And we'd like your input, if you're willing, on how we can improve." This public accountability represented a significant shift from the dismissive attitude of the previous crew. Passengers who had witnessed both the discrimination and now its remedy were watching attentively, many nodding in approval. "I'd be happy to contribute," Jamal agreed. "My architectural firm actually specializes in creating inclusive spaces. Perhaps there's a way to extend that philosophy to your company culture as well." As their conversation concluded, Jamal noticed Diane Hoffman moving through the cabin, personally speaking with each passenger. When she reached their row, she addressed both Jamal and those seated nearby. "On behalf of the airline, I want to thank everyone who spoke up today," she said. "Your willingness to stand against discrimination is exactly the kind of community accountability we need." Patricia Coleman, who had been one of the first to intervene, responded, "I'd like to provide a formal statement about what I witnessed. I'm sure many others would as well." "Absolutely," Diane agreed. "I'll be collecting statements throughout the flight for our internal investigation and policy review." The dynamic had shifted dramatically. What began as an isolated incident of discrimination against Jamal and Zachariah had mobilized an impromptu community of allies, culminating in corporate accountability and systemic change. Midway through the flight, Zachariah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, is Mr. Fletcher still mad at us?" he whispered, glancing toward the economy section where the businessman had been reseated. "Mr. Fletcher's feelings aren't our responsibility, buddy," Jamal explained gently. "Sometimes people have to face consequences for their actions, and that can make them uncomfortable. Like when I have to sit in timeout if I'm not nice to someone. Jamal smiled at the simple wisdom of his son's comparison. Something like that, yes. Their conversation was interrupted when Captain Wilson himself emerged from the cockpit during a stable portion of the flight. He made his way directly to their row. "Mr. Washington, I understand your son is interested in architecture," he inquired with genuine warmth. Zachariah's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Just like my dad. Well, we have about an hour before our approach to Chicago, and I thought you might enjoy seeing the cockpit and some aerial views of the city's skyline as we approach," Captain Wilson offered. "With your father's permission, of course." Zachariah looked to Jamal with hopeful excitement. This gesture, the captain personally inviting them to the cockpit, stood in stark contrast to the previous captain's discriminatory treatment. "That's very kind, Captain Wilson," Jamal said. "Zachariah would love that." As Captain Wilson led them toward the cockpit, Jamal received another call, this time from Derek Thompson. "Jamal, I'm at the gate in Chicago," his attorney friend reported. "The situation has escalated significantly, in your favor. There are news crews waiting to interview you, and the airline's legal team is prepared to discuss settlement terms immediately." "That's moving quickly," Jamal observed, keeping his voice low. "It's the power of social media combined with clear evidence," Derek explained. "The videos posted by other passengers have gone viral. Major news networks are covering the story as an example of both ongoing discrimination in air travel and corporate accountability in addressing it." "And Harold Fletcher?" Jamal inquired, thinking of the businessman whose derogatory comments had contributed to the hostile environment. "Apparently his company has already issued a statement distancing themselves from his behavior," Derek replied with satisfaction. "They've placed him on administrative leave pending a review of their own diversity policies." The ripple effects were expanding far beyond what Jamal could have anticipated when he simply stood his ground against discriminatory treatment. While Zachariah enjoyed his tour of the cockpit with Captain Wilson, Jasmine Hughes approached Jamal with a satellite phone. "Mr. Washington, Mr. Bennett is on the line again. He says it's important." Taking the call, Jamal learned that the airline was implementing immediate changes beyond just this flight. "We're reviewing all discrimination complaints from the past 5 years," Bennett informed him. "And we're establishing an independent oversight committee to ensure our policies are actually followed, not just written in a manual somewhere." By the time Zachariah returned from the cockpit, bubbling with excitement about the flight controls and his conversation with Captain Wilson, the flight was beginning its descent into Chicago. The boy's earlier trauma had been at least partially healed by the positive experience, though Jamal knew the deeper conversations about race and discrimination would continue in age-appropriate ways. As they prepared for landing, Jamal reflected on the day's extraordinary reversal, from being subjected to humiliating discrimination to becoming the catalyst for meaningful change. The situation demonstrated a truth he'd always tried to instill in Zachariah. Standing with dignity against injustice could transform not just your own experience but potentially the experiences of countless others who would follow. Patricia leaned across the aisle one last time. "You know, I teach American literature at Northwestern," she said. "I often tell my students that true character reveals itself in how we respond to injustice. Today, you gave your son a master class in dignity." Jamal smiled appreciatively as the Chicago skyline came into view, the magnificent architecture that had so excited Zachariah that morning now symbolizing new possibilities and perspectives. The plane touched down smoothly, and Captain Wilson's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to thank you for your patience during today's unusual circumstances. Your collective stand against discrimination exemplifies the best of humanity." As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Jamal prepared Zachariah for what awaited them, not just the architectural wonders of Chicago, but also the media attention their experience had generated. It wasn't what he had planned for their trip, but sometimes the most important journeys weren't the ones on your itinerary. As Flight 2317 approached the gate at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the difference in atmosphere from their boarding experience in Atlanta couldn't have been more pronounced. Where there had been tension and discrimination, there was now a sense of community and vindication. Several passengers who had witnessed and supported Jamal and Zachariah throughout the ordeal exchanged contact information, transforming from strangers into allies. Jasmine Hughes approached their seats as the seatbelt sign turned off. "Mr. Washington, Captain Wilson has requested that you and Zachariah remain seated while other passengers deplane. There's quite a bit of media attention at the gate." Jamal nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Jasmine." Zachariah looked up from his sketch of the Chicago skyline, concern crossing his young face. "Dad, are there going to be cameras and stuff? Like when you did that big building downtown?" "Probably, buddy," Jamal answered honestly. "Our experience today has gotten a lot of attention. But we don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to." Zachariah considered this thoughtfully. "Will it help other kids not get treated bad like we did?" Patricia Coleman, who was gathering her belongings across the aisle, paused at Zachariah's question. The literature professor smiled gently at the boy. "That's a very insightful question, young man. Speaking up often does help others." "Then maybe we should talk to them," Zachariah decided, his small shoulders straightening with resolve that mirrored his father's earlier stance. As the other passengers filed out, many offered words of support or simple nods of solidarity. Even those who had remained silent during the earlier confrontation seemed affected by what they had witnessed. One elderly woman paused beside their row, placing a gentle hand on Jamal's shoulder. "My late husband was one of the first black executives at Illinois Bell in the 1960s, she told him quietly. "He faced this kind of thing every day of his career. He would have been proud to see you stand your ground with such dignity today." Her words touched Jamal deeply. "Thank you for sharing that." Harold Fletcher, who had been reseated in economy class, kept his head down as he hurried past their row, avoiding eye contact. The businessman's earlier arrogance had been deflated by the public rebuke and the consequences that were already unfolding for him professionally. Once the cabin had nearly emptied, Captain Wilson appeared from the cockpit. "Mr. Washington, I've arranged for you and Zachariah to exit through the forward service door where a representative will escort you to a private lounge if you prefer to avoid the media." "I appreciate the option, Captain," Jamal replied, "but I think it's important that we exit normally. This situation shouldn't be hidden away." Captain Wilson nodded respectfully. "I understand. In that case, Jasmine and I would be honored to escort you both." As they made their way to the exit, Zachariah reached for his father's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about his need for security amid the continuing attention. Jamal squeezed his son's hand reassuringly. "Remember what we talked about, buddy. We hold our heads high because we have nothing to be ashamed of." Zachariah nodded solemnly. "Like the buildings you design, Dad. Strong foundation." Captain Wilson overheard the exchange and smiled. "Your son has quite a way with metaphors, Mr. Washington." "He gets that from his mother," Jamal replied softly. At the aircraft door, Diane Hoffman was waiting with Derek Thompson, Jamal's attorney friend who had provided crucial support during the confrontation. "Jamal," Derek greeted him with a brief embrace before kneeling to Zachariah's level. "And you must be the brave young man I heard standing up for himself today." Zachariah offered a shy smile. "I was scared," he admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Derek told him. "It means doing what's right even when you are scared." Diane Hoffman indicated the jetway ahead, where media representatives could be seen waiting beyond the gate area. "Mr. Washington, Mr. Bennett has authorized me to offer a security escort and private transportation to your hotel. The airline will issue a public statement if you prefer not to speak directly with the press." Jamal considered the options, mindful of Zachariah's comfort. "Let's proceed to the gate normally. We'll decide about interviews once we assess the situation." As they emerged into the terminal, the scene was even more dramatic than anticipated. News crews from major networks had positioned themselves near the gate, and a crowd of travelers had gathered, many holding up phones to record the moment. The hashtag Flying While Black was prominently displayed on several hastily made signs, a visual representation of how quickly their personal experience had transformed into a movement. Patricia Coleman, who had exited ahead of them, was already speaking with one reporter, gesturing emphatically as she recounted what she had witnessed. "The most blatant example of discriminatory treatment I've ever seen," her voice carried across the gate area. Zachariah pressed closer to Jamal's side, understandably overwhelmed by the attention. Noticing his son's discomfort, Jamal made an immediate decision. "Derek, could you please inform the press that we'll issue a statement later today? Right now, my priority is getting Zachariah settled at our hotel." "Absolutely," Derek agreed, already moving to intercept the approaching reporters. Diane Hoffman guided them toward a less crowded exit where a black SUV waited at the curb. "This will take you directly to your hotel. Mr. Bennett has upgraded you to the presidential suite, which offers a spectacular view of the city's architecture that Zachariah might appreciate." As they settled into the vehicle, Jamal's phone rang with an unexpected call. "Wesley Bennett again. Jamal, I've just received word that Captain Miller has issued a statement claiming he was just following protocol and denying any discriminatory intent," the CEO informed him. "I want to assure you that we're not accepting this excuse. Our investigation has already confirmed that no such protocol exists for repeated ID verification after boarding." "I'm not surprised by his response," Jamal replied. "Accountability is often the hardest part. Which is why I've authorized our legal team to offer a settlement that goes beyond financial compensation," Bennett continued. "We're proposing the establishment of a traveling scholarship program in Zachariah's name for young architects from underrepresented communities, along with your involvement in reshaping our company's approach to diversity and inclusion." The offer was thoughtful and substantive, addressing the root issues rather than merely attempting to buy silence. It reflected an understanding that true resolution required systemic change, not just individual compensation. "That's a meaningful proposal," Jamal acknowledged. "I'd like to discuss the details with Derek once we're settled." As their car navigated downtown Chicago, Zachariah's earlier excitement about the city's architecture began to return. He pressed his face against the window, pointing out buildings he recognized from his books. "Dad! There's the Wrigley Building. And look, Aqua Tower. Remember we saw the pictures of its wavy balconies?" Jamal smiled, relieved to see his son's natural enthusiasm reasserting itself. "That's right, buddy. Jean Gang designed that one. Remember what makes her approach special? She thinks about how people feel in spaces, not just how buildings look," Zachariah recited, clearly having absorbed his father's architectural discussions. Upon arriving at their hotel, they were greeted by the manager himself, who escorted them directly to the presidential suite. The expansive windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's spectacular skyline, the very architecture that had excited Zachariah about this trip in the first place. "Wow," Zachariah breathed, running to the window. "Dad, I can see everything." While Zachariah explored the suite, Derek called with an update. "The airline's legal team has sent over preliminary settlement documents. They're surprisingly comprehensive, addressing not just your experience but implementing system-wide changes." "That's encouraging," Jamal replied. "What about the press situation?" "They're respectfully requesting an interview tomorrow, after you've had time to rest and prepare. And Patricia Coleman has organized a group of passenger witnesses who are willing to provide formal statements supporting your account." After ending the call, Jamal joined Zachariah at the window. The boy had taken out his sketchbook and was already drawing the Willis Tower with remarkable accuracy for a 7-year-old. "Feeling better about our trip?" Jamal asked, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Zachariah nodded without looking up from his drawing. "That lady flight attendant was nice. And Captain Wilson showed me how the plane works." He paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. "Dad? Are all those people going to get in trouble because of us?" The question revealed Zachariah's deep empathy. Even after experiencing discrimination, he was concerned about the consequences for those responsible. It was a reminder of children's innate sense of fairness and compassion. They're facing consequences for their own actions, buddy, not because of us, Jamal explained carefully. When people aren't fair to others because of how they look, there should be consequences. That's how we all learn and grow. Zachariah seemed to accept this explanation, returning to his drawing with renewed focus. As Jamal watched his son sketch the Chicago skyline, he reflected on the day's extraordinary journey, not just from Atlanta to Chicago, but from discrimination to accountability, from isolation to solidarity. Their flight experience had indeed been transformed, not just for them but potentially for countless travelers who would board planes in the future. Sometimes, Jamal realized, standing firm against injustice created ripples that extended far beyond what you could initially see, much like the foundation of a building supporting structures yet to be built. 1 month after the flight incident, Jamal Washington stood before the executive board of Caldwell architecture firm in their impressive Chicago headquarters. His presentation on sustainable urban development had gone even better than anticipated, with Bradford Caldwell himself expressing particular interest in Jamal's innovative approach to community-centered design. Your vision for integrating environmental sustainability with social equity is exactly what we've been searching for, Caldwell commented as the presentation concluded. The events of last month only underscore your commitment to these principles in practice, not just in theory. The events of last month had indeed become something of a watershed moment, not just for Jamal and Zachariah personally, but for the broader conversation about racial discrimination in commercial air travel. What began as a deeply personal experience of injustice had catalyzed significant corporate accountability and public awareness. After the board meeting, Jamal called Zachariah, who was spending the day with his grandmother back in Atlanta. "How did your presentation go?" the 7-year-old asked eagerly. "They loved it, buddy," Jamal replied, smiling at his son's immediate focus on his father's work rather than his own day. "Mr. Caldwell wants us to lead the community center project." "The one with the garden on the roof?" "Yes." Zachariah's excitement was palpable even through the phone. "Dad, guess what? My teacher let me give my presentation today too." "That's great. How did it go?" "Really good. Everyone had lots of questions about standing up for justice. Ms. Hopkins said it was the most engaged the class has ever been." Zachariah's school presentation about their experience had initially concerned Jamal. He'd worried that revisiting the traumatic incident might be difficult for his son. But the school counselor had suggested that giving Zachariah agency to tell his own story could be empowering, helping him process what had happened. "I'm proud of you, Zachariah. That took courage." "I wasn't scared," his son replied confidently. "I just told the truth, like you did on the plane." After ending the call, Jamal checked his email to find an update from Wesley Bennett, the airline CEO. Attached was a press release announcing the official launch of the company's new anti-discrimination training program, a direct result of what had now become known in corporate circles as the Washington Incident. The training wasn't mere window dressing. Developed with input from civil rights organizations and diversity experts, including Jamal himself. It focused on concrete scenarios and accountability measures rather than vague platitudes about inclusion. Flight crews were now required to complete the program every 6 months, with real consequences for non-compliance. Amber Stewart and Gregory Walsh, the flight attendants who had initiated the discriminatory treatment, had both been terminated following the company's investigation. Captain Brandon Miller was currently fighting his dismissal through his union, but the evidence against him, including cabin footage and multiple witness statements, made his position tenuous at best. More significantly, the incident had sparked a Transportation Department investigation into discriminatory practices across multiple airlines, with congressional hearings scheduled for the following month. Jamal had been invited to testify about his experience, bringing much-needed first-person perspective to the policy discussions. As Jamal left Caldwell's offices and headed toward his hotel, his phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Coleman, the literature professor who had become an unexpected ally during the flight. Just saw the announcement about the new training program. Thought you'd like to know that my department is using the Washington incident as a case study in our social justice curriculum. The ripples continue to spread. Dinner when you're next in Chicago? Their friendship had continued beyond that fateful flight, with Patricia's eloquent witness statements providing crucial support for the subsequent investigation. Her academic perspective had helped frame the incident within the broader context of systemic discrimination, elevating it from an isolated occurrence to a teachable moment. At his hotel, Jamal found a package waiting, a small model of the Willis Tower with a handwritten note from Captain Lawrence Wilson, for Zachariah, a reminder that reaching great heights requires a strong foundation of character. Thank you both for helping us build a better airline. The gesture touched Jamal deeply. Captain Wilson had remained in contact after the flight, becoming something of a mentor to Zachariah, who now dreamed of becoming either an architect like his father or a pilot who treats everyone fairly. That evening, as Jamal prepared for his return flight to Atlanta, he checked social media to find that Harold Fletcher had made headlines of his own. The businessman's company had publicly distanced themselves from his behavior, implementing their own diversity training in response to the backlash. More surprisingly, Fletcher had issued a genuine apology, acknowledging that witnessing the consequences of his actions had forced him to confront his own biases. I realize now that my comments contributed to a hostile environment, Fletcher's statement read. Watching Mr. Washington maintain his dignity while being subjected to discrimination made me uncomfortable, not because he was disruptive, but because it held a mirror to behaviors I've never had to examine. It wasn't universal redemption. Many internet commenters remained skeptical of Fletcher's sincerity, but it represented another unexpected ripple effect from that day on Flight 2317. The following morning, Jamal boarded his return flight to Atlanta with a very different experience than his outbound journey. The gate agent greeted him with genuine warmth, and the flight attendants were professionally courteous without a hint of the suspicion he'd encountered before. When another passenger recognized him from the news coverage, several people nearby offered quiet nods of respect. As the plane took off, Jamal reflected on what had changed in the months since that fateful flight. The settlement with the airline had been finalized, establishing the Zachariah Washington Scholarship for young architects from underrepresented backgrounds. The airline had implemented concrete policy changes and accountability measures. Congressional hearings were pending, with the potential for industry-wide reforms. But perhaps the most significant change was in Zachariah himself. The 7-year-old had processed the traumatic experience and emerged with a deeper understanding of justice and the courage to stand up for it. During his school presentation, he had told his classmates, "My dad says dignity isn't something other people can take away, it's something you hold on to even when they try." When Jamal landed in Atlanta, Zachariah and Grandma Evelyn were waiting at arrivals. The boy launched himself into his father's arms with unrestrained joy. "Dad! Did you get my package?" Zachariah asked excitedly. "I did," Jamal confirmed, touched by Captain Wilson's thoughtful gift. "It's perfect for your collection." "Not that one," Zachariah giggled. "The one I sent to your hotel. Grandma helped me." Jamal looked questioningly at his mother, who smiled mysteriously. "Check your carry-on," she suggested. Inside his bag, Jamal found a small handmade book titled, "My Dad, My Hero," filled with Zachariah's drawings and carefully printed text describing their experience on Flight 2317 and its aftermath. The final page showed a small boy standing beside a tall man, both with heads held high, with the caption, "Sometimes being brave means standing still when others want you to move." Tears filled Jamal's eyes as he embraced his son again. What had begun as a traumatic experience of discrimination had transformed into a powerful lesson in dignity, justice, and the ripple effects of standing firm for what's right. As they walked to the car, Evelyn squeezed her son's shoulder. "You know, when I warned you about traveling while black that morning, I never imagined you'd end up changing an entire airline's policies." "It wasn't just me," Jamal reminded her. "It was everyone who spoke up instead of looking away. True, Evelyn acknowledged. But it started with one man refusing to accept unequal treatment in front of his son. That's how change always begins. In the months and years that followed, the Washington incident would be referenced in diversity training programs, civil rights discussions, and transportation policy reforms. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack would evolve into a movement documenting and challenging discriminatory treatment in air travel. The Zachariah Washington Scholarship would help dozens of young architects from marginalized communities pursue their dreams. But for Jamal, the most meaningful outcome wasn't in policy changes or public recognition. It was in the knowledge that his son had witnessed not only the reality of discrimination but also the power of dignity in confronting it. Zachariah had learned that justice sometimes required courage, that standing up for yourself could create change for others, and that maintaining your dignity in the face of discrimination was itself an act of power. As they drove home from the airport, Zachariah looked up from his sketchpad where he was designing an imaginary building. "Dad? I've been thinking about our trip. What about it, buddy? Remember when that mean captain said he'd cancel the whole flight because of us, and everyone got mad at us at first?" Jamal nodded, remembering that painful moment all too clearly. But then when people saw what was really happening, they stood up for what was right, Zachariah continued thoughtfully. "It's kind of like dominoes, isn't it? One person does the right thing, and then another person, and another." "That's exactly right," Jamal agreed, once again impressed by his son's insight. "That's how change happens." Zachariah returned to his drawing with renewed purpose, adding people standing together around his building. "I'm going to design spaces where everyone belongs," he declared. "No one will ever have to show their ID twice." Watching his son, Jamal felt a profound sense of hope. The discrimination they'd faced was part of a long, painful history that wouldn't be erased by a single incident or policy change. But in Zachariah's determination to create inclusive spaces, both literal and figurative, Jamal saw the promise of a better future, built one brave stand at a time. What would you have done in Jamal's situation? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and spoken up about it? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes standing up against injustice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of dignity and courage. Remember, change happens one brave stand at a time, and sometimes that stand begins with you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story. This powerful story illustrates several crucial truths about confronting discrimination in today's world. First, dignity is non-negotiable. Jamal never compromised his self-respect, showing Zachariah that standing firm against injustice is more important than avoiding conflict. Second, documentation matters. Recording discriminatory treatment transformed a personal injustice into verifiable evidence that couldn't be dismissed. Third, speaking up empowers others to do the same. Once Jamal questioned his treatment, fellow passengers found their voices too. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates how individual courage creates systemic change. By refusing to accept discriminatory treatment, Jamal sparked policy reforms, training programs, and accountability measures that would protect countless future travelers. He showed that meaningful change doesn't always require grand gestures or political power. Sometimes it simply requires one person refusing to surrender their dignity. The impact on Zachariah reveals another profound lesson. Children learn by example. By witnessing his father's dignified resistance, Zachariah gained a template for confronting injustice in his own life. Rather than shielding his son completely, Jamal provided tools for navigating an imperfect world with courage and integrity. Ultimately, this story reminds us that justice often begins with individual courage, ripples outward through community solidarity, and eventually transforms institutions, but only when brave people like Jamal refuse to accept anything less than equal treatment.